Wilson, once a bright light in the music world, was silenced by a debilitating stroke in 1975 and passed away just a week ago. He was only 49. Meanwhile, Florence, pushed out of the group by alcohol struggles, saw her life spiral further. A failed solo career left her with nothing, and eventually, she found herself surviving on welfare. There's a painful truth many refuse to acknowledge. The greatest black artists rarely grow old. They claw their way out of hardship, pour their soul into every lyric, every note, and just when the world begins to truly see their brilliance, they vanish. Like shooting stars burning too fast. But why? Is it the weight of a world that never fully embraced them? The racism, the pressure, the endless fight to be seen and heard? Or is it something deeper, a cold, calculated system that chews up the most radiant souls and spits them out? Watch until the end to uncover the heartbreaking stories behind the early deaths of 23 Black R&B legends. Then ask yourself, was it destiny, or the deadly neglect of an industry built on their pain? Jesse Belvin, the silenced genius America forgot. They called him Sam Cooke in the shadows. Jesse Belvin didn't have glossy album covers or million-dollar deals, but when he sang, the world stopped. His voice, smooth as velvet and aching with southern soul, could hush a room like a prayer. Born in Texas and raised in the heart of Black Los Angeles, Jesse was a prodigy. Before he turned 20, he co-wrote Earth Angel, a song that would become one of the most iconic love ballads in music history. With each passing year, his star rose higher. Industry insiders whispered that he could be the one to revolutionize R&B and bridge America's racial divide through sound. In 1960, Jesse was invited to perform at a groundbreaking concert in Little Rock, Arkansas, the first to allow black and white audience members to sit together. In a nation still deeply scarred by segregation, the show was a fragile symbol of hope. And that night, Jesse's voice soared. He held every note like it was sacred. For a moment, it felt like music could heal the world. But that would be the last time anyone heard him sing. On the road back from the concert, Jesse and his wife were killed in a violent car crash. Their car had flipped, and they died instantly. But rumors quickly spread. Some claimed the tires had been deliberately slashed. Others recalled the death threats Jesse received backstage that night. His managers swore there was tension in the air, but no one investigated. No arrests. No justice. Just silence. The world moved on. But those who knew, who really knew what Jesse stood for, never forgot. He was a rising star, extinguished before his prime. A man who believed music could unify a divided nation, only to become a casualty of that very divide. If he had lived, Jesse Belvin might have stood among the greats, Sam Cooke, Marvin Gaye, Ray Charles. But instead, he left us with a bitter lesson: talent alone cannot protect you from hate. So we remember him, not just for the music, but for the dream he carried. A dream that was buried far too soon. Let us live with more kindness, more courage, so that no other soul is lost quietly in the dark, erased like Jesse. Jackie Wilson, the man who fell while flying high. They called him Mr. Excitement, and rightfully so. When Jackie Wilson stepped on stage, the atmosphere ignited. With the nimble footwork of James Brown and a voice so powerful it shattered the limits of studio microphones, Jackie wasn't just a performer, he was music in human form. Every note he sang, every spin and slide, came from a place deeper than talent. It came from soul. Born in Detroit, Jackie rose like a supernova, setting stages on fire across America. Before Motown became a movement, Jackie was already its heartbeat. His smash hit Lonely Teardrops made him a household name. But just as he soared to the peak of his fame, fate struck a devastating blow. In 1975, during a charity concert in New Jersey, Jackie took the mic to perform Lonely Teardrops. As he hit the line "My heart is crying," his own heart betrayed him, stopping cold in front of a cheering crowd. He collapsed on stage. The audience thought it was part of the act. But Jackie never rose again. He had suffered a massive stroke and slipped into a coma that lasted 9 years. While he lay unresponsive in a hospital bed, his manager seized his wealth. His family was left struggling, watching helplessly as one of America's highest-earning artists was reduced to a forgotten name on a medical chart. No applause. No spotlight. Just silence. When Jackie Wilson died in 1984, the world barely noticed. No grand tribute. No orchestra. Just a quiet funeral for the man who had once electrified millions. And the haunting question remains: how could someone who inspired legends like Elvis, Michael Jackson, and Prince be left to fade away in obscurity? Jackie's story is a painful reflection of a brutal truth. Society worships artists when they entertain, but often forgets them when they can no longer perform. The industry lifts them to impossible heights, then vanishes when the curtain falls. Jackie Wilson was more than just a name.
He was a force, a flame,
A soul who gave everything, and received so little in return. If you love an artist, don't just clap while they're on stage. Remember them when the music stops. Honor them when no one's watching.
and if you can, be kind.
Because once, Jackie Wilson was flying higher than anyone.
And then, he fell.
Zilla Mays, the voice that was silenced, not forgotten. Once known as Atlanta's Queen of the Night, Zilla Mays didn't earn that title from sorrowful ballads, but from the comfort she gave. Her voice, smooth and warm like a midnight hug, poured through wooden radios in black neighborhoods across Georgia, wrapping lonely hearts in song. Born in 1931 to a poor but musically rich family, Zilla was the daughter of a preacher and found her voice in the church pews. By 20, she became one of the South's first black female R&B singers to have a record played on air, at a time when women like her weren't even allowed to host shows, let alone headline them. But Zilla shattered barriers. Her lullaby-like tone wasn't just heard, it was felt. Listeners would pause in the middle of their night shifts just to hear her whisper the blues. By 1955, she had risen to the top, the first female DJ in the South and a rising R&B star lighting up clubs from Atlanta to New Orleans. Then, just like that, she was gone. No farewell concert. No final song. No radio sign-off. At just 29, Zilla Mays disappeared from the spotlight. Some say she was quietly dismissed after clashing with station managers. Others believe she was silenced for speaking out about race, too bold for an industry still shackled by prejudice. Whispers swirled about a backstage incident, never confirmed but damaging enough to get her blacklisted. Years later, a former colleague spotted her in a small church outside Atlanta. She sat in the back, silent, almost invisible. When asked why she never returned to music, she simply smiled and faded into the chime of church bells. Zilla didn't die young. But her career did. It was buried not in scandal or tragedy, but in silence. The kind no one dares question. The kind that erases legacies. To many, she was the voice that kept them company in the darkest hours. But to history? Just another name it let slip away. If you've ever been moved by a voice that made you feel seen, really seen, then you know what it means to lose someone like Zilla Mays. Don't let the world silence those who speak truth. And if you still have a voice, use it. Use it for those who no longer can. Johnny Ace, the ballad of a star silenced by his own song. They called him the fragile prince of R&B, not for his stage moves or flashy charisma, but for a voice so velvet smooth, so heartbreakingly soft, it felt like a whisper to someone already gone. Johnny Ace didn't need to shout to be heard. When he sang, the room stilled. His music carried the ache of loss, the tenderness of love never fully returned. Born in 1929 in Memphis, Tennessee, Johnny served in the Navy before finding his calling in the early tides of R&B sweeping across the American South. With Pledging My Love, a song steeped in yearning, he rose from obscurity to overnight fame. The track became a quiet storm, simple, soulful, unforgettable. But just as his star began to rise, fate stepped in. On Christmas Eve, 1954, during a show with Big Mama Thornton in Houston, the backstage air was thick with cigarette smoke, laughter, and the haze of too many drinks.
Something felt off.
Friends noticed Johnny drinking more than usual.
They warned him. He waved them off.
Then came the moment that froze time. He pulled a pistol from his coat, maybe showing off, maybe tempting fate. His manager shouted, told him to stop. Johnny smiled faintly and said, "It won't go off."
Watch. A crack split the air. The laughter vanished.
Johnny dropped, blood blooming through the fabric of his freshly tailored suit. Just 25 years old, he died as the world outside sang Christmas carols, songs of peace and promise.
They called it an accident.
There was no investigation, no justice, just a stunned silence left behind. Fans didn't just lose a star, they lost the belief that talent could shield you from tragedy. What makes Johnny Ace's death so haunting isn't just the randomness of it. It's the aching truth that he never realized how close he was to legend. He could have stood beside Nat King Cole or Sam Cooke. Instead, he became a ghost of what could have been, a young soul whose promise was buried with him. In the end, it wasn't fate or failure that stole Johnny Ace, it was a single careless second. So if you take anything from his story, let it be this: go slow. Success is fleeting. Life is fragile. And sometimes, when you feel invincible, you might just be standing at the edge of your own final verse. Little Willie John, the fire that died behind bars. Little Willie John was dynamite in a small frame. Standing just under 5 feet 6 inches, his voice could shake a room to its core. Born in 1937 in Arkansas and raised in Detroit, Willie was a musical prodigy. singing gospel in church before his teenage years, then lighting up nightclubs and studios with a sound far beyond his years. Before Peggy Lee turned Fever into a legend, it was Willie who first set it ablaze. By the mid-1950s, he was one of the brightest stars in R&B, raw, electrifying, and unforgettable. But behind the fame was a storm he couldn't quiet. Willie was as volatile as he was gifted. His fiery temper earned him a reputation few producers wanted to touch. He once got kicked off a tour for fighting with his own band.
Then came the fall.
In 1964, after a bar fight in Seattle, he was convicted of manslaughter. Willie swore it was self-defense, but the court handed him 8 years in prison. Locked away in Washington State Prison, he begged to sing again, writing letters, pleading for a chance to record, to perform, to be heard. No one answered. In 1968, the world was stunned by the quiet announcement: Little Willie John was dead at just 30. The official cause was pneumonia, but no real investigation followed. His family always believed there was more to the story. Inmates later spoke of his deep depression, of his violent coughing spells, of him fainting without medical attention. A man who once lit up Motown now faded away without a stage, without a song, without even a proper goodbye. His death wasn't just the end of a life, it was the silencing of a flame too wild for the system to handle.
He didn't need pity. He needed a second chance.
And the world never gave it to him. Remember Little Willie John, not just for the trouble, but for the brilliance that came with it. Because sometimes, the most troubled souls carry the brightest fire. And when that fire goes out, the silence it leaves is deafening. Otis Redding, the soul that never got to soar. Otis Redding wasn't just a singer, he was Southern soul. No one could pour heartbreak into a melody the way he did. Every lyric felt like a final plea, a farewell whispered before the lights went out, as if some part of him knew time was running out. Born in 1941 in Macon, Georgia, Otis started at the bottom, carrying equipment as a stagehand. But fate came knocking the day the lead singer didn't show. Otis grabbed the mic, and in one unforgettable moment, silenced the room. The boy carrying gear had become the man carrying a generation's emotions. With raw classics like Try a Little Tenderness and These Arms of Mine, Otis didn't just sing, he bled into every note. But just as his star was burning brightest, a change came. In 1967, he recorded Sittin' On, the dock of the bay, softer, reflective, almost prophetic. After the session, he told friends he felt like he'd finally said what he needed to say. No one quite understood. 3 days later, on his way to a show in Wisconsin, Otis's plane crashed into Lake Monona, just minutes from landing. He was only 26. The world lost not just a voice, but a soul that hadn't finished speaking. Dock of the Bay was released posthumously. It became the biggest hit of his career, a haunting echo of a goodbye he never got to give. Those close to him say Otis changed in his final weeks. He wrote differently. He spoke of exhaustion, of dreams left undone. He grew quiet, as if preparing to say farewell, not to fame, but to life itself. Otis Redding was more than music. He was the echo of every unspoken emotion in the Black experience. He placed feeling above fame, soul over polish. And just as he was lifting others higher, tragedy struck, silencing a voice that carried the hopes of a new generation. His story reminds us, greatness doesn't need a long life to leave a lasting legacy. But we, as a society, must learn to recognize and protect brilliance while it still breathes. Cherish those who bring light, even when they do it silently, because their final song might be the goodbye we never hear, until it's too late. Rudy Lewis, the voice that never finished the song. Rudy Lewis was the soul you barely noticed but could never forget, the tender bridge between sorrow and hope in the sound of the Drifters. Born in 1936 in the heart of working-class Philadelphia, Rudy grew up among church pews, smoky bars, and cold city nights. His roots were in gospel, and he carried that sacred aching resonance into every note he ever sang. When the legendary Ben E. King left the Drifters, many thought it was the end. Then Rudy stepped into the studio. One audition was all it took. His voice left the room breathless. Overnight, he became the heart of a new era for the group. His haunting vocals on classics like Up on the Roof, and Some Kind of Wonderful whispered with both warmth and loneliness, a signature only Rudy could deliver. But behind the gentle voice was a man quietly unraveling. Rudy was a deeply private person, silently battling the weight of being a gay black man in a time that offered no compassion. He fought his demons in silence, addiction, isolation, and the pain of hiding his true self. Colleagues remembered him as soft-spoken, always smiling politely, and slipping away alone after each show. The night before recording what would become one of the group's most iconic songs, Under the Boardwalk, Rudy told the team he wasn't feeling well and retired early. The next morning, he was found lifeless in his hotel bed.
A half-closed eye. A pill in hand. Dead at 27.
Officially, it was ruled an overdose. But no one really knows if it was an accident, or something deeper. The verse Rudy had quietly rehearsed in front of the hotel mirror, it was recorded by someone else. The song became a timeless hit, but Rudy never got the chance to sing his final line. Some people spend their whole lives preparing for a moment, only to have it stolen by fate the night before. Rudy Lewis's story isn't just one of tragedy. It's a quiet plea to notice the soft voices in the background, to ask the question no one asks. Because sometimes, that simple act can save a life, and preserve a voice meant to echo through generations. Florence Ballard, the queen dethroned before her coronation. Florence Ballard was more than just a founding member of the Supremes. She was the heart and soul of the group before the spotlight ever found Diana Ross. In the grand story of Motown, she's too often a forgotten name. But behind the glitz and the #1 hits was a girl who created the dream, only to be pushed off stage before the curtain truly rose. Born in 1943 in Detroit to a struggling family, Florence lost her father young and found her escape in music. At just 15, she crossed paths with Mary Wilson and Diana Ross, and together they formed the Primettes, the early version of what would become the Supremes. It was Florence who named the group. It was her voice, rich, commanding, unforgettable, that first carried them. But when Motown signed them, everything changed. Under Berry Gordy's direction, Diana Ross became the chosen one. The spotlight moved, and Florence was slowly shoved into the shadows. No longer the lead, she was relegated to the background of the group she helped create. Hurt and humiliated, she spiraled, turning to alcohol, showing up late, clashing with the others. And in 1967, after one rocky performance, Florence Ballard was fired. From there, her life unraveled.
A solo deal went nowhere. The money dried up.
She lost her home, ended up on welfare, and sued Motown, only to lose that too. By the time she passed away in 1976, alone in a Detroit hospital at just 32, Florence was barely a memory in the music world. She left behind 3 children, a broken legacy, and a silent ache that never healed. People often call Diana Ross the uncrowned queen of Motown. But few realize the throne was built by Florence Ballard, by her voice, her passion, and her pain. Her story is a haunting reminder that sometimes the dreamer never gets to live the dream. So honor the ones who helped build your stage. Because behind every superstar is someone the world forgot. Someone like Florence, who lit the fire but was never allowed to shine in its glow. Billy Stewart, the soul rebel who broke all the rules. Billy Stewart wasn't just a singer, he was a musical renegade. They called him the Fat Lion of Chicago, not because of his size, but because of the roar in his voice and the fearless way he attacked a song. Born in 1937 and raised in gospel choirs, Billy didn't fit the mold of a traditional star. He talked fast, looked unconventional, and sang like no one else. Choppy, bold, unpredictable. But the moment he opened his mouth, the world stood still. With timeless classics like I Do Love You and Sitting in the Park, Billy etched his name into the hearts of soul lovers. But it was his jaw-dropping rendition of Summertime that rewrote the rules of performance. He didn't just sing it, he exploded it. Humming, stuttering, repeating words like a human drum, he turned a gentle lullaby into a fiery, unforgettable monologue.
Critics were stunned. Fans were hypnotized.
No one had ever heard anything like it. But just as his star was soaring, tragedy came crashing down. On January 17, 1970, while en route to a show in Columbia, South Carolina, Billy's car veered off the highway and plunged into a river. Billy and 3 band members died on impact. Hours earlier, he had called home to ask his wife to pick up more milk for the baby. That was the last anyone heard from him. Some blamed the rain. Others said the truck was overloaded. But the cause didn't matter. What mattered was the silence that followed. Billy Stewart left us too soon, before the world could truly grasp the brilliance he carried. He was more than a musician. He was a rebel spirit who proved that greatness doesn't come from fitting in, it comes from daring to stand out. Without voices like his, soul music would have lost its wild heart and raw beauty. So remember, the ones who make history are often the ones bold enough to break the rules. Billy Stewart did just that, and soul music has never been the same. Sam Cooke, the prince who fell into darkness. Sam Cooke wasn't just the Prince of Soul, he was the bridge between gospel roots and mainstream glory, opening doors for generations of black artists to come. Born in 1931 in the heart of Mississippi to a humble preacher's family, Sam's voice first rose in church pews and later with the Soul Stirrers, the legendary gospel group that introduced his divine gift to the world. But it wasn't until he crossed over into secular music that Sam Cooke truly became a star. You Send Me, Cupid, Wonderful World, these weren't just songs. They were love letters to the human spirit. He made us feel seen, cherished, and broken, all in the span of 3 minutes. Yet Sam's brilliance didn't stop at the microphone. In an era where black artists were routinely exploited and discarded, Sam dared to take control. He founded his own record label. He copyrighted his music. He signed other artists. He wasn't just performing, he was dismantling the system from the inside. Sam didn't just want to sing about change. He wanted to be the change. Then came December 1964, a gunshot in a dingy Los Angeles motel, a legend silenced forever.
The official story?
A drunken altercation, self-defense. But those who knew Sam, his family, his friends, his fans, never bought it. The bruises didn't match the tale.
The facts didn't add up.
Rumors swirled that he was set up, robbed, silenced for being too powerful, too smart, too black and bold. And just like that, the voice behind a change is gonna come was gone. Right as that very song was poised to become the anthem of a movement. He didn't get to hear it echo across protest marches and rally grounds. But Sam Cooke didn't die in vain. He died fighting, with dignity, melody, and defiance in his soul. Live like Sam did. Fight for your dreams. Speak truth even if it costs you everything. Because not everyone dies quietly. Some, like Sam Cooke, keep singing, in every note of justice, every breath of freedom, every whisper of hope. And if you've stayed with us this far, maybe the music inside you never faded. You've walked through the stories of 10 powerful souls, voices erased too soon, buried deeper than they ever deserved.
But stay with us.
The next names carry even darker truths.
Forgotten icons.
Silent screams. Secrets no one dares to say aloud. But before we move on, ask yourself, is there anything sadder than honoring greatness only after it's gone? Frankie Lyman, the boy who dazzled too soon and died too young. He was just 13 when he asked a question that would echo through generations: why do fools fall in love? With that innocent yet aching voice, Frankie Lyman became America's first teenage R&B sensation. Born in 1942 in Harlem, where dreams rarely made it past the street corners, Frankie found escape in music, and the spotlight found him. But that spotlight, so blinding and sudden, stole more than it gave. He was thrust into fame with the Teenagers, a group that turned street harmonies into chart-topping hits. But behind the bright stage lights, Frankie's childhood was slipping away. When the group fell apart, so did his world. As a solo artist, the applause grew quieter, and the silence grew unbearable. By 15, he turned to heroin, just a boy trying to numb the pain of being forgotten. Fame had loved him once, but when he needed it most, it turned its back. Rejection after rejection, Frankie kept trying to reclaim what he lost. Then, in 1968, just days after signing a new record deal that could have changed everything, he was found lifeless in his grandmother's bathroom, another young star lost to addiction. He was only 25. Frankie Lyman gave the world joy but left it in silence. Let his story be a warning. Don't crown a child a legend if you're not ready to help them grow into a whole human being. Because some wounds applause can't heal, and some loneliness is louder than a sold-out crowd. Donny Hathaway, the lonely soul behind the sound. Donny Hathaway wasn't just a voice in soul music. He was its aching heart, a fragile whisper in a world too loud to listen. Born in 1945 on the south side of Chicago and raised in poverty, Donny found refuge in church pews and piano keys. Music wasn't just his talent, it was his lifeline. After earning a scholarship to Howard University's School of Music, he poured his brilliance into haunting, timeless masterpieces. Songs like A Song for You and Someday We'll All Be Free weren't just melodies. They were whispered prayers for those carrying invisible pain. But behind the rich, velvet tone was a man at war with himself. Donny suffered from schizophrenia, tormented by voices only he could hear. Every time he stepped on stage, it was a quiet act of courage, an attempt to rise above the noise within. After each performance, family said he wept, not from applause or emotion, but from fear. He was hospitalized time and again, retreating further into isolation, even as the world called him a genius. On a cold January day in 1979, Donny was found dead outside the 15th floor of New York's Essex House Hotel. The world called it suicide. But those who knew him believe it was something else, not a desire to die, but a desperate attempt to find silence, peace, maybe even freedom. Donny Hathaway reminds us that even the brightest souls can be haunted by shadows. So if music has ever soothed your pain, remember him. And be gentle with others, with yourself. Some people shine on stage, but break quietly when the curtain falls. Minnie Riperton, the angel whose time was far too short. She wasn't just the highest voice in R&B history, she was the soul behind a sound that felt like heaven itself. Born in 1947 in Chicago, Minnie Riperton began her journey with the girl group The Gems and later worked at the legendary Chess Records. But it was in 1975, with the release of Loving You, a lullaby she wrote for her baby daughter, that the world finally heard the full magic of her voice. That song didn't just top charts, it touched hearts across the globe. What the world didn't know was that Minnie was already living on borrowed time. Diagnosed with terminal breast cancer in 1976, doctors gave her only months to live. But Minnie refused to disappear quietly. She kept recording, kept performing, and used her voice, both literal and metaphorical, to raise awareness about breast cancer in Black women, a subject that was almost taboo at the time. Those close to her remember days when the pain was unbearable, when just standing was a struggle.
But still she sang.
And when she did, it was with a softness and strength that made the world stop and listen. In July 1979, at just 31 years old, Minnie Riperton passed away, leaving behind her husband, her 2 young children, and a legacy written in notes too high for most to reach, yet felt deeply by all. Minnie never asked for sympathy. She only wanted her love to outlive her suffering.
And it did.
So be kind, you never know what battle someone is hiding behind their smile. Minnie Riperton is proof that while love can't stop death, it can echo far beyond it. Barbara Alston, a star that faded in silence. Barbara Alston was the ethereal voice that opened There's No Other Like My Baby, the Crystals' first hit that made America pause and listen. Born in 1943 and raised in Brooklyn, Barbara never dreamed of stardom. But when she sang, her voice, soft and pure like morning dew, became an unmistakable sound of the early 60s. Yet her time in the spotlight was fleeting. Barbara was never drawn to fame, and behind the scenes, tensions brewed, especially with famed producer Phil Spector. As conflicts escalated, her voice was slowly replaced, her presence diminished, and she was ultimately edged out of the very group she helped define. Then, she disappeared from the stage.
No headlines. No fanfare.
Barbara chose a life of quiet away from the noise, and when she passed in 2018, the world barely noticed. But for those who once heard her sing, her voice still lingers, a haunting, beautiful memory etched in time. Some voices only need to be heard once to leave a mark on the soul. And the most graceful tribute we can offer is to never let them be forgotten. Major Lance, the man who lost his voice before he could speak his truth. Major Lance burst onto the soul scene with energy, charm, and an irresistible groove. With his 1963 hit The Monkey Time, he didn't just sing, he made people move. A Chicago native born in 1939, Major rose from humble beginnings to become one of the defining dance voices of the 1960s. His smile was infectious, his melodies joyful, and his spirit unstoppable. But fate had other plans. Just as he was hitting his stride, his voice began to falter. By age 27, doctors diagnosed him with vocal cord and respiratory issues. The strength that once carried stadiums now cracked in silence. His performances grew uncertain, his recordings lost their spark, and the industry slowly turned away. Attempts at a comeback were met with indifference. He was once a chart topper, now barely remembered. Major would often say, with quiet bitterness, "No one believes I was ever at the top." When he passed in 1994, it was without fanfare. But for those who once danced under the magic of his music, his rhythm still lives on.
Words can be forgotten. Fame can fade.
But the joy he gave?
That's forever.
So let's remember, those who once made us smile, even if now silent, still deserve our kindness. For once, they gave us music that made the world feel alive. Clyde McPhatter, the forgotten soul of R&B. Clyde McPhatter wasn't just a singer, he was the foundation of modern R&B. Born in 1932, he helped shape the genre from the very beginning. As a founding member of the Dominoes and later the voice that led the Drifters to glory, Clyde's heavenly tenor became the blueprint for generations of vocalists to come. He was more than a pioneer. He was a symbol of black excellence breaking through the barriers of 1950s America. But success came with a cruel cost. Fame burned bright and fast for Clyde, and by the time he turned 30, his career was already slipping through his fingers. Mismanaged money, battles with depression, and alcohol slowly pulled him into the shadows. A friend once found him backstage, holding a drink, whispering, "I'm just a shadow in a room no one wants to enter." By the time Clyde died of cirrhosis in 1972 at just 39 years old, the world had all but forgotten him. His death wasn't a headline, it was a footnote. But without Clyde McPhatter, there would be no Drifters, no soulful blueprint for rock and roll to follow. True kindness isn't about cheering someone at their peak, it's about standing by them when they fall. Clyde didn't just deserve medals.
He deserved love.
And he deserves to be remembered. Billy Wright, the forgotten trailblazer who lit the fire of rock and roll. Long before rock and roll took over the airwaves, there was Billy Wright, a flamboyant, fearless icon with slick, shimmering hair, fire-red lipstick, and a voice that could hypnotize a crowd. Born in Atlanta in 1932, he was crowned the Prince of the Blues, and became a direct inspiration for Little Richard, who would later shake the world with the very style Billy pioneered. But as the industry shifted and became less tolerant of gender-bending expression, Billy's androgynous image was no longer welcome. By the time he turned 30, the bright lights had dimmed. The man who once opened for music royalty was now performing in dimly lit bars on the outskirts of forgotten towns. Years later, a young artist who crossed paths with him in an aging recording studio recalled, "He smiled, but there was no light in his eyes." Billy died in 1991, penniless and alone.
No crowd. No tribute. Just silence.
Yet every time a rock vocalist screams into a mic or a soul shakes loose on stage, there's a piece of Billy Wright in that fire. He paved the road with his voice and his loneliness. Never forget the ones who broke barriers so others could take the spotlight. Even if their name never made the marquee, they were the spark that started the flame. Brenda Holloway, the Motown flower who chose to walk away. Brenda Holloway was more than just a voice, she was a spirit. One of the youngest female artists ever signed to Motown, her smooth, soulful tone on Every Little Bit Hurt struck straight to the heart. Born in 1946, Brenda began her career as a teenage prodigy and quickly captured the nation's attention. But just as her star began to rise, she made a decision that shocked the music world. She walked away. Behind the scenes, Brenda faced quiet battles, creative restrictions, feeling sidelined, and a growing disillusionment with the Motown machine. At just 25, during what would be her final recording session, she gently placed her headphones on the table, gave a soft smile, and walked out, never looking back. She wasn't defeated. She was defiant. Brenda chose peace over pressure, authenticity over applause. In an industry that often consumes its stars, she chose to save herself. Sometimes, the boldest act of strength is simply saying no more. And in that silence, Brenda Holloway left behind not just a legacy of music, but a lesson in quiet courage. Bobby Smith, the forgotten voice of a soul era. He wasn't the face on the posters or the name in the spotlight, but Bobby Smith was the voice that carried the soul of the Spinners. Born in Detroit in 1936, Bobby led the group in its early days, his smooth vocals opening timeless hits like Could It Be I'm Falling in Love. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, but he was the heart. As the years passed and younger voices were brought to the front, Bobby quietly stepped back. He wasn't featured in interviews or album covers, despite continuing to perform night after night. One former bandmate recalled a quiet moment backstage when Bobby softly said, "It's okay, as long as I'm still singing." When Bobby Smith passed away in 2013, his name barely made the headlines. But for those who've ever carried the weight in silence, who gave their all and asked for little, Bobby's story hits deep. Sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is simply remember their names. Lee Andrews, the quiet voice that echoed through a noisy city. In the bustling soundscape of 1950s Philadelphia, Lee Andrews stood out, not with noise but with soul. As the tender lead of Lee Andrews and the Hearts, his velvet voice carried the ache of long lonely nights and the shimmer of teardrops. Born in 1936, Lee became a doo-wop sensation, a voice that floated from radios into the hearts of countless fans. But when the music world shifted and younger sounds took over, Lee didn't chase the spotlight. He let it go with grace. By his 30s, he stepped away from fame, took a job as a salesman, and became the quiet strength behind his family. What many never knew was that he was the father of hip-hop legend Questlove. As a child, Questlove often remembered his father softly singing in the kitchen. Not for an audience, but for himself. A whisper of the dream he once lived. Not every star stays shining in public view. Some keep their brilliance tucked in quieter corners of life. And in Lee Andrews' case, stepping back wasn't a loss, it was a different kind of triumph. So let's carry kindness for those voices that once lit up a generation. Their songs may have faded from the charts, but not from our souls. Tammy Terrell, the blossom that withered too soon. Tammy Terrell was more than just a duet partner to Marvin Gaye, she was his perfect harmony. Together, they gave the world unforgettable classics like Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Born in 1945, Tammy was already performing by 13 and signed with Motown before she was old enough to vote. Her voice was full of life, promise, and passion. But just as her star began to rise, tragedy struck. In 1967, while performing on stage with Marvin, Tammy suddenly collapsed. What the world didn't yet know was that she had been battling a brain tumor. Over the next few years, she endured multiple surgeries, relentless pain, and fading hope. Marvin visited her faithfully, week after week, singing to her, reading to her, and sitting by her bedside even when she could no longer respond. In 1970, at just 24 years old, Tammy Terrell slipped away. Her passing left Marvin Gaye shattered, haunted by grief that shaped the rest of his life and music. Tammy was a radiant soul, delicate yet powerful, whose life ended far too soon. Some flowers bloom only briefly, but their beauty lingers forever. Marvin Gaye, the wounded angel in his own home. Marvin Gaye, the soul legend whose velvet voice gave us timeless hits like What's Going On and Sexual Healing, wasn't just singing, he was pouring out his pain, his longing, his truth. Behind the sensual melodies and smooth harmonies was a man quietly unraveling. After turning 27, Marvin spiraled into a deep depression, battled drug addiction, and withdrew from the world. Those close to him remember nights he spent alone in the studio, crying as he scribbled hundreds of pages in a private journal, words no one would ever read. By 1984, the storm inside him reached a tragic end. Just one day before his 45th birthday, Marvin was shot and killed by his own father during a heated argument. The world lost more than a voice that day. We lost a soul crying out for love in a home that couldn't hold it. Marvin Gaye's story is a haunting reminder. The people who make us feel the most are often the ones hurting the deepest.
Be gentle.
You never know how many silent heartbreaks someone is carrying behind their smile. Don Drummond, the isolated genius behind the silent horn. Don Drummond wasn't just a trombonist. He was a tortured genius whose soul poured into every note he played. Born in 1932, this Jamaican musical prodigy helped shape the sound of ska as a founding member of the Skatalites. His trombone didn't just make music, it wept, soared, and spoke truths words couldn't reach. But behind his brilliance was a storm he couldn't escape. Don battled severe schizophrenia, often slipping into terrifying episodes of paranoia and confusion. In a tragic turn, he was institutionalized after being accused of killing his girlfriend, singer Margarita Moffatt. While confined, he composed endlessly, writing entire arrangements from memory, without ever touching an instrument. In 1969, Don died alone in that hospital. No fanfare. No grand farewell. The world barely noticed. The cause of death remains a mystery. But maybe the real tragedy wasn't how he died, but how misunderstood he was while alive. Some souls aren't meant to be figured out, just accepted, held, and loved. Many of the artists we remember today didn't perish from lack of talent or passion. They slipped away because no one knew how to love them right. They don't need posthumous praise. They needed compassion while they were still breathing. So before we label someone's pain, let's choose to listen, not with judgment, but with our hearts. Thank you for honoring these forgotten voices. If Don's story or any other touched you, please like, share, or leave a note in the comments. Sometimes, just a single word of gratitude is enough to keep a soul remembered.